October 1944. A single American destroyer, armed with 5-inch guns, charges directly at the 65,000-ton battleship Yamato, whose 18.1-inch cannons can obliterate it with a single shot. This suicidal moment epitomizes the largest naval battle in human history. Over 3 days in late October 1944, the waters around the Philippines witnessed a naval engagement so vast, so complex, and so desperate that it would never be matched. The Battle of Leyte Gulf involved over 200,000 personnel, 344 ships, and hundreds of aircraft fighting across 4 simultaneous battles, spanning hundreds of miles. It showcased every form of naval warfare ever devised, from high-tech carrier strikes to point-blank battleship duels. It introduced organized suicide attacks that would haunt the war's final chapter, and it destroyed the Imperial Japanese Navy forever. This is how Japan's most desperate gamble became history's greatest naval battle. By October 1944, Japan faced an impossible choice: lose the Philippines and die slowly from oil starvation, or bet everything on one final naval battle. The strategic situation had become catastrophic. Admiral Nimitz's Central Pacific Drive and General MacArthur's Southwest Pacific Advance had rolled back Japanese territorial gains across the ocean. The Marianas had fallen. New Guinea was secured, the Solomons and Carolines were neutralized. Now American forces stood poised to invade the Philippines, and Japan's high command understood what this meant. The Philippines protected the sea lines of communication between Japan and Southeast Asia. Lose them, and the oil from the Dutch East Indies, the fuel that powered every ship, every aircraft, every factory, would be cut off. Without oil, the Empire's war machine would grind to a halt within months. There would be no fuel for ships, no gasoline for aircraft, no power for industry. The choice was stark: risk total fleet annihilation now for a chance at survival, or accept slow death by resource starvation. The Japanese committed everything to Operation Sho-Go, a desperate all-or-nothing plan that would throw the entire remaining fleet into battle. 67 Japanese ships would face approximately 277 Allied vessels in a final gamble to destroy the American invasion force at Leyte. The scale was staggering. Over 200,000 personnel would engage across hundreds of miles of ocean. Admiral Kurita would lead the main center force, built around the super battleships Yamato and Musashi, through San Bernardino Strait as the primary strike element. The plan required coordination, deception, and courage bordering on madness. Admiral Oldendorf's 6 American battleships at Surigao Strait included survivors of Pearl Harbor, now hungry for revenge. The U.S. possessed 8 fleet carriers, 8 light carriers, 12 battleships, 24 cruisers, and 141 destroyers and escorts. Overwhelming superiority in every category. Japan's strategic desperation and willingness to risk total fleet annihilation created the conditions for history's largest naval engagement. But how could Japan's depleted fleet possibly succeed against America's overwhelming naval superiority? The answer lay in the most complex deception plan ever attempted at sea. The Japanese plan was brilliant in its complexity. Sacrifice carriers in the north to draw away American power, then strike the defenseless invasion force from 2 directions simultaneously. Operation Sho-Go orchestrated 3 separate naval forces attacking in coordination, creating a chess game across hundreds of miles that would successfully divide American attention and trigger 4 distinct battles. Admiral Ozawa commanded the northern force, a deliberately sacrificial carrier fleet designed purely as bait. His 4 carriers carried only 108 depleted aircraft total. His pilots had as little as 3 months of training, a fraction of what pre-war aviators received. Most experienced pilots had died in earlier battles. Fuel shortages had crippled training programs. Ozawa's force was a shell, but it looked dangerous on paper, and that was the point. His mission was to be seen, to be chased and to die, drawing American strength away from Leyte Gulf. Admiral Kurita commanded the real striking force, the center force. 4 battleships, including the massive Yamato and Musashi, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers, would transit through the Sibuyan Sea and San Bernardino Strait to attack the landing area from the north. Simultaneously, Admiral Nishimura would lead the southern force through Surigao Strait from the south, trapping the invasion fleet between converging attacks. A second southern group under Admiral Shima would follow Nishimura, adding weight to the southern thrust. The deception worked perfectly. Admiral Halsey, commanding the powerful U.S. Third Fleet, took the bait. When reconnaissance spotted Ozawa's carriers to the north, Halsey made his fateful decision. He took his entire fleet, every carrier, every fast battleship, every cruiser, and raced north to destroy the Japanese carriers. San Bernardino Strait, the gateway through which Kurita's battleships would pass, was left completely unguarded. Halsey believed Kurita had been turned back by air attacks in the Sibuyan Sea. He believed the carriers represented the main threat, as they always had. He believed he was making the right call. The deception succeeded in dividing American forces across hundreds of miles, creating the conditions for 4 simultaneous, separate battles. As dawn broke on October 23rd, Japan's chess pieces were in motion, but the resulting chaos would fragment into 4 distinct battles, each showcasing a different face of naval warfare. No single battle in history has ever compressed such diversity of naval combat into 72 hours, from high-tech carrier strikes to point-blank battleship duels, all happening simultaneously. Over October 23rd through 26th, the engagement split into 4 geographically separate battles that together demonstrated the full spectrum of naval combat. In the Sibuyan Sea on October 24th, carrier airstrikes demonstrated aviation's dominance as the super battleship Musashi absorbed punishment that defied belief. Wave after wave of American carrier aircraft attacked Kurita's center force. The Musashi, one of the 2 largest battleships ever built, became the focus of repeated strikes. The massive ship absorbed at least 17 bombs and 19 torpedoes before finally capsizing and sinking. Over 1,000 men went down with her. The death of the Musashi symbolized the death of the battleship era itself. No amount of armor could withstand concentrated air attack. At Surigao Strait during the night of October 24th to 25th, U.S. battleships executed the classic crossing the T maneuver in what would be remembered as the last battleship action in history. Admiral Oldendorf arranged his 6 battleships at right angles to the Japanese advance, allowing all his guns to bear while the approaching enemy could only fire forward weapons. His battleships opened radar-directed fire at ranges of 20,000 to 22,800 yards, 11 to 13 miles in complete darkness. The Japanese battleships Yamashiro and Fuso, already savaged by destroyer torpedo attacks and PT boat harassment, were annihilated. Yamashiro sank with Admiral Nishimura aboard. Fuso broke in 2 and disappeared beneath the waves. The southern force was destroyed with modern coordinated tactics that combined radar, air reconnaissance, torpedo boats, destroyers, and battleship gunnery into an overwhelming defensive system. At Cape Engano on October 25th, Halsey's forces destroyed Ozawa's 4 carriers in the north. The decoy had successfully fulfilled its mission. Despite total loss, U.S. carrier aircraft easily overwhelmed the Japanese carriers, which carried few aircraft and even fewer experienced pilots to fly them. The Japanese naval air arm, once the most feared in the Pacific, had been reduced to a hollow shell by losses, fuel shortages, and the collapse of pilot training programs. Ozawa's carriers burned and sank, taking with them the last remnants of Japan's carrier striking power. But the most extraordinary chapter was still unfolding off Samar, where the battle's most desperate engagement saw pure surface combat as Kurita's battleships surprised lightly armed escort carriers at point-blank range. The smallest American ships would face the mightiest Japanese battleships in a confrontation that defied all logic. At dawn on October 25th, Taffy 3 looked up to see pagoda masts on the horizon. Japanese battleships at point-blank range where escort carriers had no business surviving. Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague commanded a force never designed for surface combat. His 6 escort carriers displaced only 10,400 tons each and carried just 1 or 2 5-inch guns for self-defense. His 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts were small, lightly armored vessels built for submarine hunting and convoy protection. They were not built to fight battleships. Kurita's center force had passed through San Bernardino Strait during the night, completely undetected. Now at first light, his 4 battleships, including the 65,000-ton Yamato, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 2 destroyers, and 1 submarine and 11 destroyers had achieved complete tactical surprise. The Japanese possessed over 20 heavy guns, ranging from 14 to 18.1 inches. Taffy 3 had 13 5-inch guns total. The disparity was so extreme that survival seemed impossible. Commander Ernest E. Evans of USS Johnston made his decision instantly. He ordered his destroyer to charge the Japanese battleships with words that would echo through naval history. "We're going in, we're going to attack. The only way we'll get out is by hitting them hard." Johnston raced toward ships 10 times her size, her 5-inch guns firing as fast as crews could load. She closed to torpedo range and launched her full spread at the heavy cruiser Kumano, blowing off the cruiser's bow. Japanese shells bracketed Johnston, hitting her repeatedly, but Evans kept attacking. Rear Admiral Sprague coordinated Taffy 3's desperate defense with every tool available. His escort carriers launched every aircraft they carried, even planes armed only with practice depth charges. His destroyers and destroyer escorts made suicidal torpedo runs that forced Japanese battleships to maneuver, disrupting their formation and buying precious minutes. The Americans laid smokescreens, made radical turns, and fought with a ferocity that suggested they were the stronger force. The captain of USS Samuel B. Roberts, a tiny destroyer escort, gave the order to attack the big boys. His ship charged cruisers and battleships, firing her 2 5-inch guns until the barrels glowed red and ammunition ran out. Crew members formed human chains to pass shells from magazines never designed for sustained combat. Samuel B. Roberts took dozens of hits before capsizing USS Hull charged through a curtain of shell fire, launching torpedoes at battleships before being blown apart. USS Gambier Bay, bracketed by heavy cruiser fire, became the only U.S. aircraft carrier sunk by surface gunfire in the war. Despite overwhelming firepower superiority and certain victory within grasp, Admiral Kurita inexplicably withdrew from the battle. The ferocity of the American defense convinced him he faced a larger force than intelligence had indicated. Communications were confused. Several of his heavy cruisers had been damaged or sunk by torpedo attacks. The chaos of battle, the smoke, the aggressive American tactics, all combined to create doubt. Kurita turned his fleet around and retreated back through San Bernardino Strait, leaving the invasion force intact. Yet, even as Taffy 3 survived the impossible, a new horror was descending from the sky, one that would fundamentally change naval warfare forever. As Taffy 3 fought for survival, radar operators detected incoming aircraft, but these planes weren't pulling out of their dives. October 25, 1944, marked the debut of the first organized kamikaze attacks. 25 suicide aircraft targeted American ships off Samar, and the results proved catastrophic beyond anything conventional attacks could achieve. USS St. Lo became the first major warship sunk by a kamikaze strike when a single plane crashed through the flight deck into the hangar deck below. The explosion ignited fueled and armed aircraft, triggering secondary blasts far exceeding typical bomb damage. The carrier was torn apart from within, St. Lo sank in less than 30 minutes, taking 113 men with her. USS Kitkin Bay, USS Kalinin Bay, and USS White Plains all suffered kamikaze damage. Additional destroyers and escorts were hit throughout the day. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. American sailors described horror and disbelief as planes deliberately crashed into their ships. Conventional attacks could be evaded, shot down, or survived. But a kamikaze attack proved that a single determined pilot could achieve what squadrons of conventional bombers rarely accomplished: the total destruction of a warship. The explosions and fires were worse because the aircraft's fuel and ordnance detonated on impact, often penetrating to vulnerable areas before exploding. Japanese kamikaze pilots left letters expressing patriotism, resignation, and sorrow. Some saw themselves as sacrificing for the emperor and Japan's survival. Others recognized the tragedy but accepted it as necessary. The organized suicide attacks represented not just a tactical innovation, but a fundamental psychological shift that would haunt the remainder of the Pacific War. Japan's total losses at Leyte Gulf were catastrophic. 4 carriers, 3 battleships, including the mighty Musashi, 10 cruisers, 11 destroyers, over 300 aircraft, and approximately 10,500 sailors were lost. The Imperial Japanese Navy ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. American losses, though significant: 1 light carrier, 2 escort carriers, 2 destroyers, 2 destroyer escorts, over 200 aircraft, and about 2,800 killed, paled in comparison. When the guns finally fell silent on October 26th, the largest naval battle in history had ended not with triumph, but with the terrifying preview of warfare's darkest evolution. The Battle of Leyte Gulf earned its place as history's largest naval battle, not through a single decisive engagement, but through Japan's desperate all-or-nothing gamble that triggered 4 simultaneous battles across hundreds of miles. It showcased every form of naval warfare, from carrier strikes that killed super battleships to outgunned destroyers charging battleships in suicidal defenses, while introducing the organized kamikaze terror that would define the war's brutal final chapter. Over 200,000 personnel, 344 ships, and the entire spectrum of naval combat compressed into 72 hours of chaos that destroyed Japan's fleet forever and proved that courage, confusion, and catastrophic new weapons could matter as much as firepower. The battle marked the definitive end of the battleship era and the final destruction of Japanese naval power, ensuring that America's path to Tokyo lay open across a Pacific Ocean now dominated by carrier-based air power and the grim mathematics of industrial warfare.